Hello book lovers, and welcome back or welcome to Nat Cat's Bookish Cafe. Today I am here to do a spoiler-filled review of The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wang. Alright guys, so it is a beautiful day, so I am filming outside. There is a fountain over there, so hopefully that's not too distracting. I'm going to try to make sure that I talk relatively loud so that you hear me and not just the relaxing sound of the burbling water. But I decided to try my luck at a spoiler-filled review. I have never done one of these, so cut me a little slack. I don't really know what I'm doing. I haven't watched a lot of these either, so I'm not really sure what other people do when they do these reviews, but I figured I'd just give my thoughts on the book and the characters and the plots and the themes. I will say that I did not go into this book thinking that I would do a spoiler-filled review. In fact, I was over the 50% mark when I decided to do that. So some of my opinions, especially on the first half of the book, might be a little bit more vague since I wasn't taking notes while I was reading. Now again, this is going to have spoilers from like pretty much the very beginning. So if you have not read this book, please go away. No offense. But I really want you to read this book without knowing anything about it other than like the general synopsis, because I think knowing too much about this book could definitely take away a lot from the experience. So if you haven't read it, go off, get this book and read it, and then come on back. All right, to start off with, I will give you my rating for this book, and I gave this book 4.5 stars. I'm not going to give a synopsis for this book, seeing as I'm assuming that if you're here, you've already read it and you already know the synopsis of this book. So I want to start this off by talking a little bit about our two main characters, which was Misaki and Mamoru. And I apologize if I mispronounce either of those names. So these are two family members of the Matsuda household, which is an incredibly powerful family on the Sword of Kaigen. Their elemental powers lie heavily in the use of water and ice. Misaki is the wife of the second son of this family and the mother of Mamoru and his three younger brothers. So let's start with Mamoru. He is 14 years old, the oldest son of a very powerful yet cold and distant father. He is currently at school learning to be a powerful warrior. He deeply believes in the traditions of his family and of his empire and seeks to make his father proud. At the beginning of this book, he comes across Kwon, who is an exchange student who has spent time outside of the empire of Kaigen. Kwon goes ahead and informs Mamoru that a lot of the things that he believes about his empire is actually propaganda, and that their country, their empire, is not as strong as it once was, and that the war that happened many years ago had a lot more casualties than is explained in schools and tales from the elders that were there at the empire. This obviously makes Mamoru extremely angry. We very much see him as a character who kind of has his world turned upside down. He's very young and very set in his ways, but he's still very malleable. So I think he was a really great vessel for the author to use to show how important it is for people to question not just what they're learning in school, but also their government and their parents, because it's a very important part of growing up to question the world around you to make sure that you have all the information that you need to make the right decisions. Mamoru is very much a character that shows the divide of generations. We see him argue with his father, which is very unheard of in this very traditional community, when he questions his father on what he thinks about these storms that are occurring and the fact that the government is using videos from a previous storm rather than displaying the new storm-struck areas. He seems very torn about his behavior, but at the same time, he very much wants to know the truth. He wants to know what he's fighting for. And eventually, at the end, he knows what he's fighting for. It isn't so much the Empire and what the Empire is telling him he should be fighting for. It's his family. It's the ones that he loves. It's his honor as a warrior that he is fighting and eventually dying for. When war comes to their front step, Mamoru steps up and takes his place beside his father and his uncle on the front line, despite being a 14-year-old who has never been in active battle. He very much steps up to the occasion. He's known for his ability to see things differently, as his teacher told him that he takes what he is taught and he expands on that. And he does that at the end of his life when he makes a whispering blade, not just using pure water, but also combining it with his blood to kill a threat to his family despite himself knowing that he was going to die. Masuda's death I didn't think was overly surprising. There was a part of me that did expect him to die in this book. I didn't think it would be like at the halfway point. I thought it would be a little bit closer to the end, but this really acted as a catalyst for a lot of change in the other characters and the plot as a whole. So I think that the author really made good use of Matsuda's death, and that in a way a lot of good things came from it, so that we know that Matsuda, his sacrifice was well worth it, despite us of course wishing that he could continue to live and fight along his family. I think his family very much took his death as the wake-up call that it was, especially Masaki. I think Matsuda's death very much showed the importance of sacrifice for personal reasons rather than for praise or even for honor. He died alone. No one will ever know that he accomplished his goal of making a whispering blade. No one was there to see his victory or to hold him and tell him that he did a great job in his final moments and to thank him. But still, he knew deep down that he had accomplished what he needed to accomplish. And I think that shows what a strong warrior he truly was, because he was able to realize that not all accomplishments need to be shared as long as those accomplishments in some way benefit the world around them. I loved this character. I was really sad to go. I think that he was very intelligent, very kind. He was very dynamic. He was someone who could kill and tear people apart for those he loved, while showing tenderness and love towards his younger siblings, which, considering he was an eldest male, I'm assuming him helping with the care of the children wasn't the most common thing. You heard on multiple occasions throughout the story where people would tell him to pass his siblings off to his mother because he was holding them, and they would say, give this child to your mother, give this child to his mother, but he continuously came back and showed his siblings a lot of love, which he himself probably did not experience as a child because of how miserable his mother was and how cold and distant his father was. So he was very much, I think, trying to fill a hole in his sibling's life. So I have a lot of respect for this character. Now let's move on to Masaki. Masaki has a very interesting past, and the character development that she goes through in the story was so awesome to see. We follow her at multiple stages in her life. We follow her when she was young, I believe 14 as well, and she was going to school outside of Kaigen and was learning to wield the sword, as well as going out into the community and pretty much fighting crime with a group of her friends. We also follow her as she kind of first becomes a housewife and is a housewife in the present time, and how her position in the household and her behavior towards those around her changes from before and after the war, or better yet, before and after the death of her oldest son. For the first half or so of this book, Masaki is very much a demure housewife who has been kind of putting on this mask of the obedient woman in this more traditional society, despite her having a great fire in her. Throughout her life of wearing this mask, it seems that it has very much become her actual face, and she has lost a bit of that spunk that she had when she was younger. But the endangerment of her family and the death of her son causes her to completely shatter that personality and come to life as the warrior and protector that she was and wanted to be when she was younger. I definitely think Masaki made some mistakes in this book because of her unhappiness. I think that she held back a lot, especially from her sons, and I do think that she definitely realized that, and we saw that a lot with her behavior after her son's death, that she did realize that she had hurt her children with her behavior over these years. I think especially because she didn't really respond the way that I wanted her to when Mamoru came to her with questions. She knew so much, and I feel like she should have told him more. I don't know if that would have, changed anything when it comes to his death, but I just wish that she had been more open with him about her past, as well as informing him a little bit more about the truth of his government. I think he was old enough, and that she realized that he was intelligent enough to understand these things, but fear prevented her from taking that step. I have a bit more to say on these characters, but I'm gonna move on for a little bit, and my discussions on them will continue as I go into the themes, as well as some specific plot points in this book that really stood out to me. So when it comes to themes in general, I think this book very much focuses on the need for advancement. It shows that there is definitely a place for tradition, but that a country or an empire does also need to consider the fact that it needs to keep up with its allies as well as its enemies. Throughout this book, Kaigen is very much isolated. There are people within this empire that have never left Kaigen. Even those that are teaching the children the history of this empire have not really gone outside of the empire itself, which leaves a lot of the people in this empire incredibly ignorant to what is going on around them. In this book, we see not only that the enemy on their front door has become more powerful and a more prominent threat, but that their ally has become more powerful and therefore can hold more control over the Sword of Kaigen. Sword of Kaigen, it seems like throughout this book, may no longer truly be in control of its decisions. Its ally seems to have very much taken over the reins, which for an empire can be an incredibly dangerous thing to do. This book also shows the dangers of being biased against certain populations, looking down on certain populations, and oppressing certain groups within communities. We see a lot how the assumption that once the weaker party, always the weaker party, plays a role in this book, and it very much caused these powers to turn their back onto a growing enemy instead of keeping an eye on them and acknowledging them as a potential threat. All right, sorry if the angle moved a little bit, it's just that light bulb was like putting a shadow on my face. But Kaigen's deep-seated nationalism has put it into a weaker position compared to their allies and their enemies, who have continued to grow and advance, while Kaigen has continued to tell its citizens that they are the most powerful and what they're doing right now is what's making it so therefore there should be no changes, which we saw was incredibly detrimental to this empire. This empire focused very heavily on concentrated areas of power, and while a few of those concentrated areas of power survived, a lot of what was around them was destroyed, which isn't a sustainable way of running a country. We saw with the Masuda compound that a lot of their citizens and those in the village around them ended up being completely annihilated, leaving them in a position where they really struggled to rebuild because they didn't have the foundation for a fully functioning village. Another theme that was deeply rooted in the story was misogyny. We saw in the Sword of Kaigen that women were not allowed to fight. They were used as housewives and to produce children, preferably sons, who would then be able to in turn also learn to fight. I think the character Hirori, who was a friend of Misaki, really did a good job of displaying the dangers of misogyny, which in this case prevented women from learning how to protect themselves. Hirori's story is a very tragic but not uncommon story that occurs to women within times of war. She watched her children die and also ended up being raped by one of the enemy soldiers. This eventually caused her to become pregnant, and after the child was born, she committed suicide. This tragedy could have been prevented if she, like Misaki, had been able to defend herself and her household. But because she did not have those abilities, she was completely helpless in the situation. Her husband was on the front line, and therefore she had no one to defend her. This nation causes its women to be overly dependent on their men, and that has in turn caused them to be helpless in the face of invaders. Now, one thing I will say is that a lot of women, not just Misaki, in the story show great strength. You see that when it comes time to decide if they're going to listen to the empire and keep their mouth shut about the invasion, a lot of the women speak up against that, and they want to honor their men who died in battle, and they want to demand that the empire helps them rather than sitting by quietly and following the instructions of men as they have been in their entire lives. This was a really powerful scene for me, these women all coming together and kind of questioning why they're doing what they're doing, which throughout the majority of their lives is not something that they have really had the opportunity to raise concerns about. During the building of the village, you definitely saw that the women played a big role in this as well, and as Misaki takes on a more equal role to her husband, we see a bit of a shift within this community. All right, so let's move on to some specific scenes that I want to discuss. Let's talk about the involvement of the Yama. Now, I'm just gonna call them that. And these are supposed to be Kaigen's allies. I thought that there was definitely some strange behavior occurring that was never explained in this book, which I thought was a little bit strange. When the military showed up to the town, they took all the bodies of both the enemy and of the villagers and did something with them. And we don't know what, and by the end of the book, we don't know what either. And I thought that that behavior was incredibly strange and concerning, suspicious, especially since the Yama seemed to be leading. It definitely seemed to me like there was possibly some sort of experimentation going on, but really we're provided no answers in this book, which is one of the reasons I don't consider this a standalone, but I'll go into my opinion on that in a little while. So the two scenes that I really want to focus on are when Misaki says goodbye to Mamoru and when she and her husband have their big battle. So first, the scene where Misaki says goodbye to Mamoru is obviously a heartbreaking, emotional punch of a scene. She has gone out on her own to find the corpse of her son. She already knows that he is dead and is now seeking to find his body to retrieve it. When she does find it, she kneels before him to apologize and say goodbye and let him go so that his spirit can be free. This scene plays a big part in Misaki realizing that her behavior over the past few years has been very detrimental to her children. She apologizes for not telling him about her past and for withholding the person that she truly was. We see throughout the story how much Mamoru has learned from his mother and how instrumental she was in making him the warrior that he was. We see his use of his blood magic to help people. We see his use of her instructions on the sword to fight. We even see his use of her climbing techniques to get out of a slippery situation that he and Kwan found themselves in towards the beginning of this book. To imagine the power that Mamoru would have had if she had been a more present mother definitely could have saved his life. One thing I'm a little glad she never realized and that her husband never realized is that their inability to communicate is the reason Mamoru is dead. Before the war started, Misaki wanted to escape with the children, but Takuro said that they had to stay. Misaki ends up attacking Takuro, injuring his arm. Later on, when they are fighting who Mamoru dubbed the Dragon Slayer, I believe, he is unable to kill him properly because of the injury to his arm caused by his wife. If he had not been injured in his arm, he would have killed this character, this enemy, and Mamoru would not have had to face him on his own and fall into his sword. Now, this is not something that either of the parents realized, thank God, because I think that really would have completely destroyed them. But despite that, they still realized, especially Masaki, that it was time for the two of them to come together and be a united force. The fight between Masaki and Takuro was really incredible to watch. She finally made her stance. She made herself known as a powerful ally to him rather than just a housewife. And it really opened his eyes that he has not been living in the present and that he has very much been a coward for the majority of his life. He has the ability to escape into the mountain, which causes him to not be able to present emotions because he himself is not fully human. He has become over-reliant on this form of self-protection, and Masaki causes him to realize how detrimental this has been to his family, to his sons, to his wife, to his brother, to himself. Masaki is not blameless in this situation. She realizes that she has been so self-absorbed in her own misery that she never realized that her husband was consumed by his own misery as well. They decide it's time to be open with one another so that they can be a united front and show a strength for their family and their village. Masaki makes it known that Takura needs to switch gears, that he needs to go from the position of a follower to that of a leader. He has not been handling his position of leadership since the death of his brother very well, and has in fact been running from that. And she says, no more. It is your job to take care of these people, and I'm going to be by your side. We are not going to lose any more children. We're not going to lose any more loved ones. You and me, we're going to do this. We're going to walk away from this fight. You're going to prove yourself to me. And then we're going to, sorry, the wind is blowing. And then we're going to walk away here side by side, and we're going to fix this. So it was definitely a very powerful scene, a scene that changed the dynamic of the family, of Takura's relationship with his sons, with his wife, even his belief towards women. Now obviously he doesn't just change overnight or anything like that, and we see that in some of his behavior throughout the book, but at least it is that first step. Alright, so with this book, let's talk a little bit about it being a standalone. Let me know down below if you would consider this a standalone or as part of a series. I personally feel very much that this is a prequel to the, I think she called it the Thionite series that has unfortunately been discontinued, so I'm not going to even start that series or anything. So there's definitely going to be some questions in this book that are unanswered. I feel like with a standalone, you have to be able to complete the story. Having an open ending is okay to a certain degree. However, with this book, there are plot points that if you want to see where they go, you have to read the series, which therefore, in my eye, does not make this a standalone. Like I stated with like the Yama and what they were doing with the bodies, there is a lot of unanswered questions in this book. So yes, I would consider this a prequel. No, I would not consider it a standalone, which is actually the reason I couldn't give it a full 5 stars, because I was going in here expecting a standalone fantasy, and honestly, that's not what I got. But overall, I still had an incredible time with this series. I know that I've been kind of babbling on, possibly with no rhyme or reason, but like I said, this is my first time doing a spoiler-filled review, so I'll try to do them every once in a while, and hopefully I get a little bit better at doing them and can kind of order my thoughts a little bit better. But I did just want to kind of put my thoughts out on this book just because it's so well known. Make sure that you recommend this to your friends because I think that everyone should read it. Alright guys, so that is going to be the end of this video. Let me know your thoughts on this book, and actually let me know if you have read the 2 books in the series that came out before the series was discontinued, and if it is at all worth for me to check those out, or if they'll just kind of leave me at the edge of a cliff the way that this book did. But thank you as always guys for supporting my channel by watching my videos, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!